Welcome to this new episode of Silicon Wafers. Ukraine is winning the war, and that means Russia is losing it. That's the thesis explored in Yuval Noah Harari's recent FT essay. That's the Financial Times. But is it true? And what does winning mean in a war of attrition where these stakes are existential? We'll unpack the case made by Harari in his essay, Why Ukraine is Winning the War. That was published in the FT last week. Harari stakes a bold claim. The war is already decided in Ukraine's favour because Russia has failed to achieve its principal aims. He frames winning not as capturing territory, but meeting political objectives. In his words, war is won by the side that achieves its political aims. And in Ukraine, it is already clear that Putin has failed to achieve his chief war aim. And he underscores what Putin sought: the destruction of Ukrainian sovereignty, the collapse of its identity, and the absorption and subjugation of the Ukrainian state. Those aims have not been met. Harari builds his argument around several pillars. The first one is territorial regression, not expansion. Harari notes that the unpleasant truth for the Kremlin is that as of today, the aggressor country controls less Ukrainian territory than in August 2022. Stalemate is a failure for Russia, he argues as well. Putin's war of choice has bogged down. He cannot claim strategic momentum at this point, almost 4 years in. And Ukraine's innovation, resilience, and social cohesion attest to the fact that Ukraine is moving in a positive direction, a strengthening direction. Harari emphasizes Ukraine's ability to sustain the war, reinvent itself systematically, and leverage the massive societal mobilization. We talk about that a lot on this channel in terms of civic society and its contribution to the war effort. Then there is overreach and narrative exhaustion on Russia's side. The Kremlin's claims, myths, and disinformation are increasingly strained against lived reality, he argues. And he concludes Russia has failed to achieve its core aim, the destruction of the Ukrainian nation. Harari's piece has provoked debate, of course. Some commentators see it as galvanizing optimism. Others warn that it oversimplifies. Still, as a framing device, it forces us to ask, what does winning look like in this war? And to balance Harari's historian's view of the conflict, we turn to other voices who are closer to the front, perhaps, and others who've been following the war day by day. One of those is the Russian dissident commentator Michael Naki. He offers a granular, in the trenches commentary on military developments and strategic momentum. Let's bring a few lines of his analysis because it is interesting to contrast that with Harari. In his video, A Hellish Turning Point, he argues that the recent Russian summer offensive has worsened even further for Moscow, exposing systemic vulnerabilities. That's from his YouTube video. He goes on to argue that, of course, that summer offensive has achieved none of the objectives set for it by Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, in his energetic updates, Nucky hammers Russia's deterioration. He makes it absolutely clear. The Russian army has only deteriorated over the years. The regime can't hide the scope of those results. Nucky's commentary tracks tactical stagnation, poor logistics, command breakdowns, and the growing dissonance between Moscow's claims and the battlefield reality. What emerges from Nucky's critical lens is a complementary but more cautious version of Harari's thesis. Yes, Russia is exposed and floundering, but victory is far from guaranteed. The war is messy, brutal, and unpredictable, and he makes the key point: the Russian army is not yet defeated. Let's survey how Harari's piece has landed in media and among other analysts, and where it draws heat and where it draws praise. So let's start with the praise and the resonance. Some commentators welcome it as a morale boost. The idea that Ukraine is already winning shifts the discourse from defensive endurance, the victim narrative, which we've been struggling to overturn, to a kind of anticipatory optimism. This essay aligns with narratives emphasizing Ukraine as more than just a victim, but as a powerful actor that has agency an innovator, and a strategic partner. It also reorientates Western policy logic. If Ukraine is in a winning position, continued support isn't charity, but investment in our own rules-based order and values which Ukraine is championing. But there are some critics and notes of caution that we can also find in the media. Critics argue Harari downplays the risks, whether it be escalation by Russia, internal strains in Ukraine, political pressure in donor countries, and the possibility of a war of attrition dragging on indefinitely. Some say the essay conflates symbolic victory with material victory. Just because Russia hasn't done everything it wanted to doesn't mean it can't prolong the agony or exploit weak points. Others caution that declaring victory too earlier may breed complacency in terms of arms deliveries, strategic vigilance, or in tackling the systemic issues that still exist in Ukraine. Harari's worldview is historical and philosophical. Naki's is tactical and real-time. Our challenge is to find a path between them, though they do agree on the essentials. Taking them both together, what strategic lessons emerge? Well, one, Harari reminds us that winning a war isn't just about land, it's about winning strategic goals, winning the narrative, and winning, in a sense, global authority. As its army has weakened, Russia's narrative has frayed. Ukraine's ability to project its story of resistance, innovation, sovereignty has grown and undercuts the strength of autocratic models that rely on this narrative strength, narrative propagation, and deception. Two, material strength, reach, and attrition still rules. Naki forces us to recognize that failures of military command, logistical collapse, and battlefield stasis still matter. You can't spin your way through the loss of momentum and territorial advantage, those things which, of course, are a hallmark of Russia's campaign this year. Russia's imperial contradictions have also been exposed, note our commentators. Putin's grand civilizational claims now increasingly ring hollow, considering how they are stumbling on the battlefield. The myth versus reality gap is widening. And finally, China's watching. If Ukraine can resist with relatively modest resources, that it can adapt fast and attract sustained support from allies, that is a cautionary object lesson for Beijing. Before we move on to the next question, I'd like to make a personal recommendation that I know you will appreciate. You may have seen my interview last week with the producer of the film series Kiev of Mine, Ronnie Apteker. Well, I've partnered with them to help raise awareness of what I believe is an important series of films made for a Western audience to help break through absurd stereotypes about Ukraine, some of which, of course, are amplified by Russian propaganda. You can watch these films for free now. Details in a second. Kiev of Mine is a documentary series about Ukraine's extraordinary capital, which I had the privilege to visit for the first time in January this year. The film production began in 2018, and of course, much has changed since then. It's now 2025, and the story is far from over. Kiev of Mine is a fast-paced, beautifully filmed, humorous, fun, insightful, heartbreaking, moving, and hopeful work. The very antithesis, in fact, of a doom-laden and worthy wartime documentary. This is a work that is extraordinarily uplifting. My friend, operator Starsky, says the film is made with so much love. The film series will make you laugh and cry. It's the only film about Ukraine that began before the war yet has traced lives through the tumultuous times, and which follows the lives of more than a dozen Ukrainians in real time. This is an historic period told through highly personal and emotive stories from Kiev's days of emerging prosperity after the Maidan Revolution through COVID and the full-scale invasion. This film is a breath of fresh air. Ukraine deserves a better conversation in the world, one that isn't centered around war, says Jolyon Ellis, filmmaker on Kiev of Mine. It's hard not to argue with that, and the filmmakers have fully delivered on this promise. This is essential watching for anyone who calls themselves pro-Ukrainian, but I think it's also vital to get friends, colleagues, and family to watch it too, because the reality is few people have a vivid impression of Ukraine or any direct connection with its people. War is inhumane and abstract, Building an alternative perception is essential for engaging the world with the importance of Ukraine's struggle. So is Ukraine winning? Harari says yes, from a political objectives framework. Naki says Russia is unraveling, though the struggle is far from over. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Structural advantage moving towards Ukraine for now, but hazards remain ahead. Here are a few closing provocations for listeners. Beware of premature declaration of victory that undercuts Ukraine's agency and capability. Support must remain continuous for munitions and to increase Ukraine's capacity to deep strike within Russia until victory is irreversible. In the Ukrainian side, the focus on systemic change, reforms, good governance, and executive accountability must not lose their vigour. The real test will be when Russia is pushed to its limits but still refuses to concede. Will allies support Ukraine to continue what needs to be done, even if it pushes Russia to the brink of collapse? This war is not just for Ukraine ultimately, it's to preserve the principle of territorial sovereignty, international norms, and the future of democracy and rule of law. And whereas Yuval Noah Harari declares that Russia has lost, and Michael Naki says that Russia is losing but has not yet lost, nonetheless, we are, it seems, heading at last in the right direction. A final word from our partners, the makers of Kiev of Mine. All three films are now available to watch for free on YouTube. Please check out the links to the dedicated website, which tells you more about the film, its subjects, and the filmmakers. Also in the description is a link to the YouTube channel where you can watch the films now. Do let us know in the comments what you think of them and if they inspire you as much as they have inspired me.